Kagurabachi fans, Bachi bros, rejoice. The only video you ever need is right here. Yippee. To be entirely honest with all of you, was not the biggest fan of this manga when it released. Didn't really see the appeal, thought it was pretty average. But it is the beginning. I gave it a bit of time and I recently caught up with it and my opinion has changed. Whether or not it's for the better or worse, only time will tell. So today, we're going to talk about it. The good, the bad, the right, the wrong, and potentially its future. So, let us begin. If you know nothing about Kagurabachi, you never heard about it, you don't know a singular thing, I will give you the quickest, crystal clear rundown, and that is all you need. Magical swords, sorcery, edginess. That is it. However, you have probably heard about this story, or at least passed by it, because before it even released, it was gaining traction like crazy. A singular picture, this one specifically, had a lot of people excited. Not because of what the story was about, but it looked kind of gritty and edgy and people were interested. So shockingly, of course, on release, it blew up. This doesn't equal to sales, this doesn't equal to success, but it had a very large reception. A lot of eyes were on it. So much so that it started to rank higher than stuff that's really popular. One Piece, Kaizen, Chainsaw Man, etc. This is really good. However, it's also really bad because it kind of provided this false expectation for people that were just passing by. Everyone's talking about Kagurabachi, everyone's making memes on it, everyone's making fun of it in a very playful way, calling it the next big thing and comparing it to a lot of other stories. And while it's all in playful taste, a lot of people won't see the playfulness of it. So they'll go and they'll read it and try and gauge the excitement for themselves, and they'll be thoroughly disappointed with what they are hit with. A very basic story, at least at the beginning. Kagurabachi does not do anything different, it does not do anything new. If anything, it has a pretty rough start. The only thing it actually has going for it, in my opinion, is its artistry. It's cute, it's quirky, doesn't look all too different, but when it gets to its action, its iconic moments, its double spreads, the author goes all out. They have a vision, they have a direction, they have a style that is very identifiable to them. A good way I could describe it is a lot of atmosphere or shrouding like moments. Basically, not just crystal clean, beautiful representation of like two characters standing side by side ready to fight, but the ability's dimension captures the entire scene. And it's something that the author does very often and very well. At the beginning, this is what's going to hook you. But then on the other half of that artistry is simplicity, which every weekly author has. Basically, it's another version of that art that's a lot more dumbed down and very much easier to handle on a week-to-week schedule. Character designs looking very simple, backgrounds being barely drawn, you name it. The more detail, the more time, the less time you have to work on other things. The weekly manga experience, in a nutshell. When it comes to this story, however, there is a lot to be desired. So while you're sitting here and thinking it looks pretty, it's a little bit entertaining, can the story actually provide something? Can it be enjoyable? Can it hit those marks? Yes and no. So let's talk about the meat and the potatoes. Kagurabachi's story is one of revenge. Very straightforward, very simple. It's kind of the best thing that it does right at the beginning, so it doesn't get your hype or expectation out of order. You know what you're getting into, you know what you're expecting. If you don't like revenge tales, you're probably not going to like this straight off the jump. However, for me, there was a big problem instantly. It's kind of just a little bit boring. Revenge manga is very predictable in a lot of ways. It's very straightforward, it's very linear. You're going from one direction to another direction to another direction, you know, and you kind of hop, skip and jump to certain checkpoints until you get where you need to be going. Standard, right? Just like a lot of other stories. The problem with revenge is that it already gives you where that checkpoint kind of is. You know exactly why they're going to that checkpoint, and shrouding it in any sort of mystery or uniqueness is a little bit more difficult to do because you have so much clarity or direction for the story already. That's okay, we can kind of move things around. We add more things, add more characters, and we can fill it out in a more fruitful way. It doesn't always have to be revenge, it can evolve into a lot of other things, which it does kind of do. The issue, however, is that a lot of that evolution, at least for me, comes in the prospect of characters. You need to have enjoyable characters for the plot of revenge, because they are directly what is carrying your story forward and even enticing the type of conflict. Think about this for a moment. If you have a typical revenge tale, you want to have the villains, the enemies, the people that the main character is going after be either the most misunderstood or the most most hated people on the planet. That is Revenge 101. And your main character needs to have some sort of hatred or drive to seek those villains. However, Kagurabachi is not a typical revenge tale. It's not the standard. It's something a little bit more loose, a little bit more flexible, so it can kind of maneuver its story beats however it feels fit. For Weekly Shonen Jump, I think this is a better route to go, and I wouldn't be surprised if the editors guided it to be like that. There is a big restriction on freedom of expression and storytelling on revenge-like stories. There's not a whole lot you can do in the creative department when it comes to telling other stories within it. You kind of just have to go straight for where you want to go, but you know what you're getting into, so that's okay. On Kagurabachi's front, we're chasing sorcerers that are killers, and we're also chasing swords. That's the difference. The two don't exactly line up. They cross paths very often, but they're in entirely different directions. And funny enough, for the idea of like a revenge light story, they both have different outcomes. If you chase the sorcerers, that's hatred, that's the revenge. But if you chase the swords, that's more trying to save the world, trying to get back what was taken from you and fulfill your dying father's wishes. Don't let these swords out into the public. They cannot be used by people. They will destroy everything. Two directions, two possibilities, crossing paths ever so often. I like these ideas. However, my biggest issue so far is the characters. They're all kind of stale. They're a little bit boring. They don't have all too much personality or attitude or charisma, characteristics that stand out to themselves. They're all pretty blanketed, safe characters. It's not the end of the world, but if you think like this, alongside myself, what doesn't help this situation is a character known as Sojo. He is the main villain of this first arc, and while he's very straightforward in his design, his approach, even a little bit of his emotions, his mind, his thoughts is where things get rather interesting. You see, as edgy as this manga is, this villain is anything but a slaughtering psychopathic maniac. You may think it at first. That's exactly how he comes across, but over time, you see exactly the type of obsession he has with the swords and being able to wield them and understand them and learn them and evolve them, and how that sword is being represented by the individual user. Now, this becomes a conflict of belief. The main character believes that these swords were never created to be like this. They're not created for war or mass destruction or anything. They're not meant to be evolved that way. The villain thinks otherwise. His belief is that the swords were created for this purpose. They were designed to be this, and they were designed to be evolved further into that direction. Who do you think is correct here? Is the main character correct, or is the villain correct? Whatever answer you picked, you're wrong, because they're both correct. These swords were created during a time of war. They were specifically designed to be used as protection, but also to end the war. So you're using it to kill a bunch of people, bestowing certain individuals with mass amounts of power so they can overthrow and outbalance the other side. That is destruction. That is war. But in a contorted way, it's also peace. These swords have been sealed up and taken away from the public, and no longer are they being used. So they done its job, but still the purpose of their creation is that of bloodshed and killing and war. So what Sojo believes is actually true, but what the main character believes is what the swords represent now. So having this conflict of belief is really interesting, and honestly, it is the best point of writing that the author has done so far. Only 20 chapters in, and you have such a compelling arc and nature for a villain of a character and a main character that has to understand this. See, our MC could have easily just thrown it out the window. He could have just denied what the villain believed because he thought the swords were like this. Instead, he does the opposite. He actually accepts what Sojo represents, what his beliefs are. He doesn't agree with him, but he accepts it. And this opens up a huge conversation about what the swords represent, about what the power represents, and how it evolves over time. In short, these aren't just tools of war. They're quite literally, physically, the representation of human soul and identity. The more you figure yourself out, the more you dive into it, the more you can unlock of this sword. And that makes sense pretty well actually when you figure out that the sword was originally only a vessel for the power of the human user. So humans have spiritual energy, think Bleach, and they wield it into the sword, and that's kind of how they activate it. However, the sword can actually channel back into the user and awaken them in some sort of metamorphosis. Pretty cool. So both the MC and Sojo come back to a point where it's basically that, where they're pushing themselves to a limit of evolution that they've never experienced before, but they also accept each other's beliefs. I love that. I thought thought it was incredibly done. The action being straightforward and simple still looked very beautiful, and you had a really great interpretation of a villain. But what is the issue? What is the big problem? That villain is kind of gone. In saying that, it does give me faith for the future. Bigger, badder, more interesting villains than Sojo. I think the author can handle that. But leaving such a massive impression so early on for a villain makes you feel like you've been with them for 100+ chapters. Realistically, it's only been about 16. I think that's a pretty recognizable accomplishment, and where the author seems like they feel comfortable, where they thrive, is not the downtime. It's not the small moments in between, but it's in the heart of the action. It's in the evolution of the characters and putting them against each other. So, Kagurabachi, that's it, we're caught up. From here, I expect great villains, I expect great combat. Even though Sojo died, there is still a belief in me that he will return. The last thing he tried to do was touch this rock of immortality, basically. It's a little bit more complex than that, we're not going to get into it. I'm rubbing my hands together, scheming, plotting, hoping that maybe you could bring him back. Normally I wouldn't want that for villains, but Sojo left such a massive impression on the story and what it kind of means for Kagurabachi that I feel like if you did bring him back, it would be very interesting. I'm sold. I think Kagurabachi has an interesting journey ahead of it. However, I'm not going to be too comfortable with it until it gets past like 50 odd chapters. To me, that's when it feels safe of not being cancelled. I guess all we can do now is wait and see. Hello, welcome to the end of the video. If you made it this far, thank you. I appreciate you. Leave a like and subscribe, that'd be nice. Also, check out one of these videos here. If you're watching back to back, helps YouTube recommend my videos more. YouTube loves that, I love that, and you might enjoy it too. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Kagurabachi. You love it, you hate it, how do you feel? And I will see you all later. Goodbye.